She was once one of the most photographed women in the world. A duchess, a mother to princesses, a woman who dined with queens and presidents. Today, Sarah Ferguson, the Duchess of York, is facing a reality she never imagined: nowhere to call home. After being forced to leave the Windsor mansion she's called home for years, Sarah is now, by her own description, effectively homeless. And in a twist that's breaking hearts around the world, her own daughters, Princess Beatrice and Princess Eugenie, cannot offer her a permanent place to stay. How did the woman who married a prince end up without a roof over her head? What forces conspired to leave her stranded? And why can't the royal family, with all their palaces and wealth, find room for one of their own? This is the story of a fall from grace that nobody saw coming. And it's happening right now. To understand how Sarah Ferguson ended up here, we need to go back to where it all began. July 23, 1986. Westminster Abbey. Sarah Margaret Ferguson, a vibrant, red-haired 26-year-old, walked down the aisle to marry Prince Andrew, the Queen's second son. The world watched as she became the Duchess of York. Unlike the shy, reserved Diana who had married Prince Charles 5 years earlier, Sarah was different. Bold, outgoing, fun. The cameras loved her energy, her genuine smile, her infectious laugh. She was like a breath of fresh air, recalls a former palace staffer. The royal family desperately needed someone who wasn't afraid to show personality. Sarah and Andrew seemed genuinely in love. They were the fun royal couple, skiing in Switzerland, attending glamorous parties, living the dream. She gave birth to Princess Beatrice in 1988, then Princess Eugenie in 1990. Two beautiful daughters, a handsome prince for a husband, a title, wealth beyond imagination. From the outside, it looked perfect, but inside the palace walls, cracks were already forming. Andrew's naval career meant he was away for months at a time. Sarah was left alone, navigating the brutal world of royal protocol without a guidebook, constantly compared to Diana, constantly criticized by the tabloid press. They called her the Duchess of Pork because of her weight. They mocked her fashion choices. They tore apart every decision she made. The pressure became unbearable. In 1992, photographs emerged of Sarah on vacation in the south of France with American businessman John Bryan. In one particularly damaging image, Bryan appeared to be kissing Sarah's toes while she sunbathed topless. The scandal was devastating. The Queen was reportedly furious beyond words. The marriage was over. Sarah and Andrew separated in 1992 and divorced in 1996. Just 10 years after that fairy tale wedding, the Duchess found herself cast out of the royal family, vilified by the media, and facing an uncertain future. But here's what makes Sarah's story different from every other royal divorce. She never really left. After their divorce, Sarah did something unprecedented in royal history. She moved back in with her ex-husband. Not immediately. At first, she struggled through years of financial chaos, bad business decisions, and mounting debts. At one point, she owed millions of pounds to various creditors. The woman who once lived in palaces was, by her own admission, nearly bankrupt. But through it all, Andrew remained loyal. Despite the divorce, despite the scandals, despite the palace's disapproval, he never abandoned her. In 2008, Sarah moved into Royal Lodge, the massive 30-room mansion in Windsor Great Park where Andrew lived. They weren't remarried. They weren't even officially a couple. But they were. Something. We're the happiest divorced couple in the world, Sarah would say in interviews, smiling that same vibrant smile from her wedding day. For years, this arrangement worked. Sarah had a home. Stability. She was close to her daughters. She could be part of her grandchildren's lives when Beatrice and Eugenie started their own families. Royal Lodge became her sanctuary, her safe place after decades of chaos. But in the background, forces were moving that would shatter that safety forever. Andrew's friendship with Jeffrey Epstein, the allegations, the disastrous BBC interview, the lawsuit, the settlement. Andrew's fall from grace wasn't just his own destruction, it was Sarah's too. When King Charles III ascended to the throne in September 2022, he had a vision, a slimmed-down monarchy. Fewer working royals, less extravagance, more accountability. And that vision had no room for Prince Andrew living in a 30-room mansion at taxpayer expense. The pressure on Andrew to leave Royal Lodge began almost immediately. Charles wanted his disgraced brother to downsize to Frogmore Cottage, the much smaller Windsor property previously occupied by Prince Harry and Meghan Markle. Andrew initially refused. Royal Lodge had been his home for over 20 years. He had a 75-year lease on the property. He'd spent millions renovating it. Why should he leave? But Charles had leverage, money. As king, Charles controls the Duchy of Lancaster, which funds the private expenses of the monarch and certain family members. He began cutting Andrew's annual allowance, which had been around £250,000 per year. Without that income, Andrew couldn't afford the massive upkeep costs of Royal Lodge, estimated at over £400,000 annually just for maintenance and security. The financial pressure became unbearable. Reports emerged in late 2024 that Andrew had finally agreed to leave Royal Lodge. The timeline was set, early 2025. But here's what nobody talked about in all those news reports. What would happen to Sarah? She wasn't technically a royal anymore. She had no official standing, no allowance from the duchy, no right to royal housing. When Andrew left Royal Lodge, Sarah would have to leave too, and she would have nowhere to go. The question everyone's asking seems simple. Why can't her daughters help? Princess Beatrice and Princess Eugenie both have beautiful homes. Beatrice lives in the Cotswolds with her husband Edoardo Mapelli-Mazzi and their children. Eugenie splits her time between London and Portugal with her husband Jack Brooksbank and their sons. Surely they could make room for their mother? But the reality is far more complicated. They're desperate to help, reveals a source close to the family. But they're in an impossible position. Here's the problem. Beatrice and Eugenie are trying to build lives separate from the toxic Andrew scandal. They're not working royals anymore. They have their own careers, their own families, their own identities. Eugenie works in the art world. Beatrice has a career in technology. They're raising their children away from the intense scrutiny that destroyed their parents' marriage. Having Sarah move in permanently would mean constant media attention. Photographers camped outside their homes. Questions about Andrew. Reminders of the scandal every single day. It's not that they don't love their mother, explains a royal commentator. It's that they're trying to protect their own children from the circus that follows Sarah wherever she goes. There's also a practical issue, space. While their homes are comfortable, they're not palaces. Beatrice and Eugenie have young children, nannies, their own need for privacy. A permanent house guest, even a beloved mother, creates strain. Sarah has reportedly stayed with both daughters for short periods. A week here, 2 weeks there. Guest room arrangements that are meant to be temporary. But temporary has stretched into months. And months are becoming a concerning pattern. She's essentially couch surfing, says one friend of Sarah's, pain evident in their voice. Bouncing between her daughters' homes, staying with friends when she can, never quite settled anywhere. For a 65-year-old woman who's battled breast cancer and had a skin cancer scare just last year, this instability is more than inconvenient. It's potentially dangerous. The stress alone could impact her health. The constant moving, the lack of a permanent base, the psychological weight of homelessness, even for someone with famous daughters, takes a toll. When news of Sarah's housing crisis broke, social media erupted. The reactions were sharply divided. On one side, outrage at the royal family. They have literally dozens of properties sitting empty, wrote one viral tweet with over 200,000 likes. But they can't find one room for the mother of 2 princesses? Disgusting. Others pointed out the cruel irony. Prince Andrew brought shame to the family, but Sarah, who's done nothing but support her daughters and try to rebuild her life, is the one who ends up homeless? Make it make sense. Support for Sarah has been particularly strong among women who see her story as amplifyingly familiar, despite the royal trappings. A woman who stood by her ex-husband, supported her family, tried her best, and ended up with nothing to show for it. She gave up everything for that family, commented one user. Her reputation, her privacy, years of her life. And this is how they repay her? But there's another side to the reaction. Those who believe Sarah brought this on herself. She chose to hitch her wagon to Andrew even after the divorce, argues a royal critic. She could have made a clean break, built an independent life. Instead, she stayed connected to a man everyone knew was trouble. Others point to Sarah's past financial mismanagement, the debts, the questionable business deals, the time she was caught in a cash for access scandal, trying to sell access to Andrew for £500,000. She's made poor decisions for decades, reads one comment. At some point, you have to take responsibility for your own life. The debate rages on, but one thing is clear. Sarah Ferguson's plight has touched a nerve. It's forced uncomfortable questions about loyalty, family obligation, and what we owe to people who've made mistakes. As of today, Sarah Ferguson's living situation remains uncertain. She's been spotted staying at various locations, sometimes with friends, sometimes at hotels, occasionally with her daughters. But nothing permanent, nothing stable. There have been reports that she's looking for her own place to buy or rent, but her financial situation remains complicated. Her income comes from writing children's books, occasional media appearances, and some business ventures, but it's hardly the fortune required to maintain the lifestyle she once knew. She's trying to be independent, says someone who's worked with Sarah. She doesn't want to be a burden on anyone. But the reality is, at 65, after cancer treatments, trying to start completely over. It's overwhelming. Some have suggested that the palace could help. King Charles could allocate one of the many unused royal properties for Sarah's use. Not as a gift, but as a gesture of compassion for the mother of his nieces, for a woman who's been part of the family for nearly 40 years. But palace sources suggest this is unlikely. The king's position is clear, explains a royal insider. Sarah is not a working royal. She receives no public funding. Giving her a grace and favor home would set a precedent. What about other divorced spouses? What about other extended family members? It's the institutional thinking that has defined, and some would say cursed, the House of Windsor for generations. Rules over compassion. Protocol over humanity. Prince William reportedly shares his father's view. The family must modernize, must cut ties with those who aren't contributing to the firm. But Princess Anne, the king's sister, is said to have privately expressed sympathy for Sarah. She's the mother of 2 princesses and grandmother to royal children, and allegedly said, "Surely we can do better than this." The internal family debate continues, while Sarah remains in limbo. Here's what Sarah Ferguson's story really reveals about the modern monarchy. It's an institution struggling with its own contradictions. On one hand, the royals project an image of family values, tradition, loyalty across generations. Christmas at Sandringham, weddings at Westminster Abbey, the importance of blood and legacy. On the other hand, when someone becomes inconvenient, when they're associated with scandal, when they're no longer useful to the firm, they can be cast aside with shocking coldness. Sarah Ferguson has never stopped loving her daughters. She's never badmouthed the royal family in the press, despite having every reason to. She's maintained her dignity through bankruptcy, through scandal, through cancer. And yet, she has nowhere to live. It shows you what the monarchy really values, observes a historian who studied royal family dynamics. Not loyalty, not decades of service or suffering, but optics, public perception, whether you're currently useful to the brand. For years, Sarah stayed silent about the more painful aspects of royal life. But recently, that silence has begun to crack. In interviews, she started to speak more openly about feeling abandoned, about the loneliness of her position, about how difficult it is to be forever connected to a family that doesn't quite want you. "I'm still the Duchess of York," she said in a recent interview, her voice catching slightly. "But sometimes I wonder what that means anymore. What I'm Duchess of, where I belong." It's a question without a good answer. Right now, Sarah Ferguson is somewhere in England, perhaps at one of her daughter's homes, perhaps staying with a friend, perhaps in a hotel room. She's doing what she's done for nearly 40 years, surviving, adapting, putting on a brave face while dealing with circumstances that would break most people.